Right after the Pasha Sota comes Pasha's Nazir. Right after Pasha Sota comes Pasha's Nazir. What is the reason that Nazir follows Sota? Rashi says Nazir follows Sota because Haroye Sota bekulkula yazar atzvim and ayayin. Right, the Baal Shem Tov says. This is actually a raya from a Rashi to the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov says that when something comes your way, you hear something or you see something, it's automatically a lesson in Avodas Hashem. The Rebbe used to say it every single Shabbos by Farbrengen. When I was in Yeshiva, every single Shabbos by Farbrengen, the Rebbe would say it. The Baal Shem Tov says anytime a person encounters anything, you see something or hears something or he comes across it some other way, that's a proof, that's a lesson in Avodas Hashem. There's a Sikha from the Frierdiker Rebbe, I think, who says, this is the Aleph base of Chassidus. It's a very difficult Aleph base. It's a difficult, but this is the Aleph base. The Aleph base of Chassidus is that everything is a message. If it came across your desk, if it came to your attention, that's a ride that has a shaykhis to you. So on this basis, the Gemara says that if a person encounters a Sota B'Kulkula, he should become a Nazir. Why? Because the Mishnah says, the Gemara explains that sometimes a person does an Aveda, not because they don't care or because they're spiteful, but because they fell into it. You know, they slipped and slide into it. Pardon me? Wrong environment. So the Mishnah brings a number of examples. One of them is Harbe Yaldo Seisa, when you act childish, things that are not good happen. Halbe Yayenoisa. Wine weakens a person's resolve. Wine makes a person, as they say, a little bit more loose. And sometimes bad friends, childishness, or wine can bring a person to a state where they're going to be weaker in their resolve, in their principle, in their self-control, and they fall into Sota. So the Gemara says, if a person witnesses Sota B'Kulkula, it's a message to him. And the message to him is that he needs to do Parishos. He has to do something to protect himself from this yoyness, from tests, because the fact that he observed it is itself a proof that he's vulnerable to this davar lo tov, to this undesirable behavior, and it's a message. And the message is, you need to make Parishos. You need to separate yourself from wine. That's what the Gemara says, that what Rashi brings in Chumash, this is the idea. Now, Nazir is really a neder, you know that? Nazir is really a neder. Nazir is the form of nadarim. There's different kinds of nadarim. The classic neder is a carbon. This is kachim, right? This is holy. You take an animal and you say that it's in the terms of the power of the word, it's equal. In terms of the power of the word, there's other aspects, but in terms of the power of the word, it's equal, right? The simplest example of a neder is Harei zu oila. This animal is a carbon. Harei alai oila. On me there's an oil. It's called a nedova and a neder. When I say Harei zu, this animal is an oila. If this animal dies, this animal gets hurt, I don't have to find another animal to take its place. But if I say halai arai oila, the carbon is on me. So then, if the animals that I designated for the carbon dies, I have to replace it with another. It's called neder, the power of word, right? I've talked to you about this many times. In Jewish law, only actions matter, right? If I want to sell you something or buy something from you, the word of mouth means nothing halachically. Just make a kinyan, you have to do an action. But the expression is, amirose ligavaya kimisirose lehedyet. When it comes to kedusha, when it comes to hektish, words are like an action. When I say I'm going to give money to tzedakah with my word, it's like as if I made a kinyan that I'm going to give a certain amount of money, and you have to honor your word. The pasuk says in Pashas Matais, lo yachel devore, do not make your words chulin, do not make your words ordinary, because when it comes to hektish, when it comes to karbonis, words are like actions. And of course, there's called kedushas aguf and there's kedushas damim. There's two kinds of hektish, right? Sometimes if a person donates to the Beis HaMikdash a watch is not a carbon, you can't put it on the mizbeach, so you would sell it and you would use the wealth, the value of that watch for what's called bedek habayis, the upkeep of the Beis HaMikdash. But the most classic example of neder is when I make something holy, I give it away to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. One of the topics which I'm hoping one day to get to, in Pashas Bechukoisai, there's a variety of different forms of neder. One of them is the word chedem. Hareizu alai chedem. And there's two types of chedem. There's chedem for the Beis HaMikdash, there's chedem for koyanim. The point is, there's a koyach of nedarim. There's another chiddush in neder. Another chiddush in neder is I can take something which I'm not giving to the Beis HaMikdash and say, this for me is a korban. It's an unusual halacha. Hashem gave us 613 mitzvahs. The power of a neder and the power of a shvua in two different ways is I use words to add for myself more mitzvahs. I say, I am going to do this on this day. If I say it b'lashon shvua, which means I say, I swear, of course I'm saying this because b'li shvua, b'li neder, that I'm going to give $100 to tzedakah. Again, I just gave an example from Hektish, that I'm going to finish 3 prakim Tanya this morning before I daven. So my words have obligated me. So a shvua means I set it upon myself, right? A neder means to say these prakim Tanya are to me a korban. What I just said is incorrect language, because the idea of neder is I say this food is to me a korban, so I'm not allowed to eat it. Not I have to eat it. I'm not allowed to eat it. So however you would word it. But the difference between a shvua and a neder is, the classic yeshivish form. Shvua is gavre, and neder is chefza. Shvua means I obligate myself. I swear upon myself. And neder means on the object. I say this object in relationship to me is like a korban. So nedarim and shvuas are an unusual koyach. First of all, because it's the case where a person's words are as powerful as a person's actions, which is unusual. And second of all, because I'm sort of adding new Judaism, right? Hashem says I'm allowed to eat this, I'm saying I'm not going to eat it. And there's a variety of different nedarim. There's a neder of karbonis, and there's a neder where I make other things to me like a korban. Say a person has a weakness in whatever it is, he eats too much. So he says the second plate of food that I'm going to eat is to me like a korban. He's prohibiting upon himself like a korban. It's called a neder. But nedarim have no rules, right? I can make any neder I want. And I can make the neder any way I want. Nazirus is a neder. Ish ki yafli linde nazir la'avaya. Nedarim is a neder. Nazirus is a neder. But Nazirus is an unusual neder where the Eibishter sets the terms. When a person says that I allow Nazir, he's accepting upon himself automatically 3 things. A, he's not going to come and tummy lameis. B, he's not going to drink wine. And he's not allowed to have anything associated with wine products. I was learning chitas yesterday. Yesterday's chitas was till 1 o'clock in the morning, to be very blunt. It's one of the longest chitas, and then you'll have in the whole chumash. But the halachas of yesterday's chitas was that not only you can't drink wine and wine products, you can't eat grapes. You can't eat grapes. And grapes are just a pain. It's all it is, a fruit. Grapes are not intoxicating. It's sort of, in the chumash, the Torah says, if I'm not going to drink wine, I can't eat grapes. What about vodka? Halachically, l'chayra, vodka would not be included in a neder nazir. But if the purpose which a person is being mazir atum min hayayin has to do with the fact that whether it's wine or it's some other alcoholic beverage, it would l'chayra go under the same banner. But I don't know how you would incorporate that into a nazirus. But the halach of nazirus says not drink wine. I can't even eat grapes. I can't eat the skin of grapes. I'm not allowed to go anywhere near grapes. So those are the 3 things. I'm not allowed to cut my hair, and I'm not allowed to drink anything, take up anything which has an association with grapes. Pardon me?
If you make kiddush, is he allowed to be your example somebody else's kiddush with wine?
I believe so. He's allowed to have hanoah from grapes, and there's the other factor of mitzvahs lav lehenes nitnu. Mitzvahs lav lehenes nitnu. Mitzvahs not given for hanoah. Even mitzvahs that have a shaykhas to hanoah, lav lehenes nitnu. So it doesn't necessarily have to have hanoah. But okay, it's an interesting question. And the other factor is stam nazirus shloshim yom. If I say I'm going to be a nazir, the nazirus is for 30 days. I could be a nazir for my whole life. I could be a nazir for 100 days. And of course, a nazir has to bring a series of karbanos. The minimum is 30 days, right? Now, the thing about a nazir is that here's a person who on the one hand is vulnerable. That's why he's making a nazirus. The reason he makes a nazirus is because he's vulnerable to do an aveira. And the Mishnah says in Pirkei Avos, what's the lashon? Nidrim syag laprisho. So if a person wants to be pure, if a person wants to be removed from sin, if a person wants to be holy, if a person wants to be as he must be, the answer is to make a neder. Nidrim protect us, which means he's vulnerable. On the other hand, the status of a Nazir is equal to that of a Kohen Gadol. Right? A regular Kohen is not allowed to become Tamei L'Meis. But there's 7 Meisim where he's mechuyev to be Metamei himself, and if he refuses, the halach is Metamei Makocha. You're forced to be Metamei himself. What are those 7? Father, mother, brother, sister, son, daughter, wife. Another Kohen is mechuyev to be Metamei himself to those 7 Meisim. He doesn't have an option. Pardon me? In Pashas Emet, right. A Kohen Gadol is not allowed to be Metamei himself even to his father's, mother's, brother, sister, son, daughter, wife. A Nazir is like a Kohen Gadol. He's Kaddish, but Kedush is Kohen Gadol. So on the one hand, the whole reason for the Nazirus is because he's vulnerable. On the other one, when he makes the Neder Nazir, he's holy like a Kohen Gadol. And of course, the Maimorim explained based on the Chazal that Neder is a very, very, very subjective thing. Is it good for a person to make a Neder, or is it bad for a person to make a Neder? And of course, there's a couple of criteria. The most basic criteria is chas v'shom, you don't keep a neder. If you make a neder and you don't keep it, it's a terrible aveda. And the Rambam writes, the Gemara says, it's better not to make a neder than to make a neder because there's always a vulnerability that you're going to chas v'shom be over on the neder. In addition to that, a person has to make a neder for the right reasons. You have to make a neder because you really want perishos. If a person makes a neder and the reason he's making neder is he wants people to perceive him as holy, that neder is undesirable. The only kind of neder, the only kind of nazirus which is truly correct and admirable is if the person really wants to be a parish, wants to remove himself from the world. And this is a special category. I learned Masechta Nazir a long time ago. I learned it only once. It was many, many years ago. And I learned it from tapes. I listened to a shiur. So the Maggid shiur, through of course the Masechta, repeated over and over again, that I think of Shimon Ken Gadol. One of the Kohanim Gedolim said that in the time of the second Beis HaMikdash, a lot of people accepted it by themselves Nazirus, and they brought Karbanos Nazir. He says, I never ate from the Karban of another except once. That there was a person who had beautiful hair, and he saw his image in a well. Remember, he saw a mirror of himself in a well, and he made a Nazir not to cut his hair. In other words, there was once in the entire history of his kahuna where a person made a neder nazir and he felt that the motivation for that nazirus was optimum, was ideal. So there's, first of all, the problem of chas v'shom being violated in neder. And second of all, even if you keep the neder, if you don't make the neder for the purposes of becoming pure and holy, you have other interests. So it's an undesirable thing. And the Rambam brings it from the Gemara that there's a rule which says dייך מה שאסרה תורה. There's a two-sided, there's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, we say נדרים syag לפרישות, which means on the one hand to make a neder is a good thing. It keeps you safe and holy. If I'm vulnerable, if I have a weakness, so I make a neder to keep myself away from it, right? The Gemara's expression is which means you tell a Nazir not he shouldn't drink wine. So don't go near a bar. Don't go near a liquor store. Stay away from any place where vulnerability may meet you. You tell the Nazir, stay away, be careful, be wary, don't trust yourself. Because the person is vulnerable, which of course is a very, very practical thing. We talked about it a little bit last night, right? The halachas of yichud is a similar idea. Torah says, be careful, don't be alone with a woman. No one's going to say anything is going to happen, but you don't want to be in that position. You don't want to be vulnerable in that way. So if a person has a weakness, you're making an extra fence, right? On the other hand, there's a rule that says, dייך מה שאסרה, don't be from within God. Rashi says in yesterday's chitas, that when a Nazir brings a carbon chatas, he brings it by the chatas of a person who became tummy in the middle of his nazirus, but l'chayda applies by regular Nazir as well. Why does a Nazir bring a carbon chatas? What sin did he commit? That he deprived himself of drinking wine. The Eibush to put all the physical things in the world for us to enjoy. And for a person to deprive himself of something in the physical world, which the Eibush did not prohibit, in other words, if he's being, so to speak, frumer than HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then that's a trim for Karban Chatas.
You just mentioned before in Rashi that that don't see a Sota to look at himself and say that maybe I drink too much or should stop.
Right, so there's two sides. On the one hand, the Nazirus is considered Prishus. On the other hand, the Nazirus is considered a Chet. Because ideally, I should not be vulnerable. And if I'm not going to be vulnerable, I have no reason to make the neder. Verstehst? The point is, Nazirus is necessary, but it would be better if we didn't have to make Nazirus. And that's why it says in Chassidus, because HaTorah is nederim. A Chacham is mater is a neder. A person who makes it Kabbalistically, a neder comes from Bina. And a Chacham is Chachma. You make the neder because the beginning of Gvura is Bina. If you see yourself, you feel yourself vulnerable, you make a neder. If you come to a place where you realize that you're no longer vulnerable, then you go to a Chacham that's higher than the Madrega of Bina, and he's matter. He unties the neder backward, as if you never made it. So those are the two sides of Nazirus. It's necessary because of vulnerability. It brings to a state of Prishus, and it's always preferred to have not to have needed to make the neder. It's always better to not have made the neder. And when nederim, since you are taking upon yourself a ninyan, which Hashem did not mandate, it has to be l'shem shemaim, it has to be sincere, otherwise there's toigdish. And that's the continuation of Nazir to Sota. Sota means the person makes a mistake. And fakert, ein adam ever aveda el kei nichnes beruch shtus. We talked about this last night. We don't make mistakes wantonly. We don't make mistakes with chutzpah. We make mistakes because of weakness. Wir sind abgeschwacht. We're weak.
I'm saying you have a weakness towards it. How could you tell him you have to give chatas?
Because the chatas is for the fact that he's weak. The chatas is the fact that he's weak.
The fact you're living is the problem.
Well, the fact that you're asking a very uncomfortable question, but the answer is the fact that I have not been mavared myself sufficiently. I know a man. Well, I guess the best way to describe him is modern Orthodox, but he's not modern Orthodox. He's a bigger chassid than most chassidim. He has an incredible amount of self-control, and he's a deep intellectual. Doesn't waste a minute of his time. He's involved in very good things. And he always talks to me. He brings a Yerushalmi someplace, which says this point that the world was made to enjoy. He's coming from the philosophy of the modern Orthodox. You know, their whole idea is why you have to be frummer. Be frummer to Shachanor. Don't be extra frum. Don't be machmir. The Eibusher didn't put us in this world that we should deprive us things of this world. And he's right. For him. You understand? You see, but self-control is not only a nature. Self-control is good habits. Self-control is a way of life.
So you're saying we're doing the opposite. Instead of calling things self-control, we're staying away from self-control and just putting more boundaries.
When we have a weakness in self-control, we put a boundary, and the same Torah that gave us permission to create that boundary says you should know that the need for that boundary, and therefore the boundary itself is rooted in sin. So when you go back to drinking wine, Achei, yishta, Nazir, yayin, it brings a kol mechatas. Another is for a time, it's not for life. It's for a period of time. And then you stop the Nazirus. Anyway, those are some thoughts on Nazir. Now the shayla is how it lands in Pashas Nasso. How does it land in Pashas Nasso? Yes, there's chitas with Sota and Nazir. The longest chitas of the year.
In the beginning, Sota mentioned this?
That what?
About...
Are they Sota b'kul yazim and ayayin? Could be, ich denke nicht. The Eibishter, you know what it's like? It's like Pesach and Sfiras HaEmet, right? Pesach Hashem reveals himself, and then you have to work on yourself. Shavuos Hashem gives us the Torah. Right after the Eibishter gives us the Torah tells us the Torah is very holy, and it's very perfect, and it's very godly, and it's very beautiful. But in the real world, you have to be careful. Those are the pashas of Sota and Nazir. That even though the elokus of the Torah is so powerful, we may need to pay close attention to our Yetzer Hara, not trust ourselves, right? That's in the Mishnah. You shouldn't trust yourself. And if you have to make fences, you make fences so that you can preserve the Iker.
Is that self-control, for instance?
You put in extra fences to preserve self-control, to keep your self-control.
But it's not actual self-control.
Well, if it works, it is. Hey, self-control is one simple bottom line. That I didn't do what I didn't want to do. Motivation is nice, but the most important thing is that I didn't do it.
The best self-control is bad.
The best self-control is not to have to create fences. It's a healthy self-control. And if you can't have a healthy self-control, you do whatever you need to do to preserve self-control.